So, welcome and thank you very much. I'm pleased to welcome Michael Seal, Associate Conductor of the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. Formerly, it's Assistant Conductor and formerly violinist in the orchestra. So, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you very much for meeting with me for this interview.
Thank you for asking me, and it's a real pleasure to meet you finally via Zoom and say hi.
Thank you, thank you. It's we're now eight hours time difference. I'm in California. Mike is in Birmingham, I imagine, or in London. Where are you?
That's right.
Birmingham.
Yeah, I'm in Birmingham. Yeah, where I live.
Wonderful. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, since you've had this wonderful path from being a professional violinist in the orchestra and then starting, I think you became only the second associate conductor in the history of the CBSO. You've worked with so many wonderful people, musicians, conductors, different soloists. So I'd like to start by asking you to tell me how this journey started, how this transition from being the insider, member of the orchestra, turning into a conductor. How did this happen?
I think the phrase people use is poacher turned gamekeeper. Um, uh, the, how it happened was I did a little bit of conducting when I was a student. I was a student here in Birmingham at the Conservatoire. I did 1 year study with Jonathan Del Mar, and I was always interested in conducting. But what happened was, really from the age of 14, all I ever wanted to be was a professional violinist. So I got into the CBSO, and I was a second violinist for my entire career. And I decided I wanted to play with an amateur orchestra. And I was asked to lead the local big amateur orchestra in Birmingham. And I thought, well, it'd be good. It would keep me, playing tunes. It would keep me playing in high positions on the violin. And they gave me a chance to play a concerto once every 2 years. And then moving on, what happened was the conductor of that orchestra double booked himself for a concert and asked me and said, "You've studied conducting. Would you like to do the concert for me?" And I remember standing backstage thinking, I'm not nervous. And 6 months before, I played a concerto with the orchestra, and I was racked with nerves for a week. And I wasn't nervous. And I went on and I had a really good experience. And from there, I just conducted more amateur things. And I suppose the biggest important day was I think it was 1999. Somebody in the CBSO, one of the players who was presenting education and schools concerts, said, wouldn't it be nice if we had somebody in the orchestra to conduct those rather than paying an awful lot of money for somebody who's not invested in the whole process? And so they decided to have a conducting day where anybody could apply, and four of us drew the short or the long straw, and I conducted the orchestra for an hour, which was, exhilarating, frightening, conducting your own colleagues. And two of us got a chance to conduct a concert. The other guy, Mark, who was a bass player, I think he decided he didn't want to do it, or take it any further. I thought I enjoyed it so much, and from there, it sort of they kept giving me more and more little things here and there. And then in 2005, we were due to do a world premiere by a British composer called Richard Corsten for orchestra and pre-recorded orchestra. And I recorded the pre-recorded part, and Zachary Oromo, their music director, was going to conduct the concert. He pulled out ill, and they asked me to conduct the world premiere. And the next day, Stephen Maddock rang me up and said, "Would you mind coming into the office?" And he offered me the job as assistant conductor. So that's how it happened over a sort of 6-year period, I suppose. I went from conducting a little bit to being the assistant conductor, but I stayed in my job for 9 more years as a violinist, and I was assistant or associate.
How fascinating. It seems like a natural transition and that it was meant to be.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I look back on it now. I've conducted the CBSO more than anybody else. I think, I keep statistics. I'm very sad in that way. I've conducted about 760 different concerts or recordings or whatever, and I think over a third of those are with the CBSO. And I always think, if I'm ever nervous with them, I always think, well, they wouldn't keep asking you if you weren't any good. So yeah, maybe it was meant to be.
Wonderful. So tell us, even going a few steps back, how did it all start musically for you? Tell me about your formative years, your education. Who are your most important mentors, people who inspired you?
Um, I started when I was playing the violin when I was 9, non-musical family. I took a test at school where, you go to school one day and the teacher says, we're taking a test today. So I took this test. It was a load of bleeps. It sort of went, bo, 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 which wonder number 3 was the highest. And, you're a kid of 9 and I just filled it out. And it was a way of finding out if you had a good ear. And a few of us were offered violin lessons. And I thought, well, why not? So I went home one day with a violin. And my first teacher was, he really, really pushed me. And I got to, in the UK, we have this system of grade exams, and there are 8 grades. And I got to grade 5 in 3 years. But then we moved south, and I discovered that I'd got there, but I didn't have a very good technique. And really in the south of England, in Kent, which is not far from London, that's where my formative years, and especially orchestras, came about. I joined the local youth orchestra and then the county youth orchestra and worked my way through to becoming leader. And I think probably my first mentor as a violinist was a guy called John Ludlow, who's he's still alive. He basically led all of the London orchestras in his time, freelance or contract. And he was our violin coach, and he taught me how to play, how to use the bow, the spending and saving of the bow, the bit distribution of the bow, where in the bow you should be playing. And so when I got to music college in Birmingham and I sat in orchestra, I discovered that nobody else had been taught this stuff. And I just happened to know where to play and how to use the bow. And I think he was probably my first real formative, other than my violin teachers, my real first mentor. And then as in conducting terms, that year I studied with Jonathan Del Mar, and other conductors would know Jonathan for his work for Bärenreiter, doing text editions of Beethoven, or that particular first edition of Beethoven. And he was the conductor who came most regularly for about 2 or 3 years, and I studied under him for a year. And yeah, I would definitely call him a mentor. But then I would say that the mentors going into conducting especially were the people who conducted me every week. I joined the CBSO in 1992, offered my job in 1991, which is the middle of the Rattle era. And so I was conducted by Simon Rattle, and during those times, Pierre Boulez came, very young Gergiev came, and I sat there, when you're sat at the back of the section watching these amazing conductors. And all of the time it was going in. I didn't think I was going to become a conductor, but it was all going in. I think that's the biggest sort of school I ever had.
That was exactly going to be my next question.
Oh, sorry.
No, but it really gives me the trigger to follow up on this. So in all those years, both as a player in the orchestra and then as assistant conductor, associate conductor, you must have assisted some marvelous musicians that have come to town. So what are those, you must have a big bag of collection of memories of working with these people, both as a player and as an assistant associate conductor. Can you recall a few for me?
Yeah, as assistant, I didn't do an awful lot of assisting because I was playing in the orchestra. In that particular way, if a conductor said, "Have you got an assistant conductor who can conduct while I go and listen?" then they'd all point at me in down at the front of the second violins, and I would get up and do it. But every year we did a concert performance of an opera, and most of those that I assisted were with Andreas Nelsons, who became a very good personal friend. My job was to sit out, obviously, and do the assistant's job, point out where the balance was bad, point out and he would get me to conduct things while he went and listened. Those were amazing times because I got to see him. I got to see him work anyway if I was playing or assisting, but to see his thought processes at the end of every day as to what we were going to do the next day and things like that. As a player, once I'd started conducting, then I was watching people so hard to see what they were doing, even down to what they were saying. And Zachary Oromo was a great help to me. He gave me some lessons. I remember one particular lesson. I was at his house and we got so deeply engrossed in the music that I realized after 3 hours I could barely speak because I hadn't had a drink of water or anything. We'd just been talking for 3 hours. And yeah, he was wonderful in that regard. He even came to watch me conduct an amateur orchestra rehearsal. He offered to do it, and he said, "Send me some dates," and I sent him some dates. I just didn't think he'd come. And then I was stood outside in the coffee break, and he came marching down towards the conservatory and said, "So, what are we rehearsing?" And I thought, "Oh God!" And it was Walton 1 and with an amateur orchestra. Yeah, no pressure. Walton 1 with an amateur orchestra, and we were just about to rehearse the second movement, the fiendishly difficult scherzo, and he plunked himself down at the end of the horn section. You could see these horn players looking across, like, that's Zachary Oremer, you know, and things like that. I'm so grateful for them to do that, and that's why I will go out of my way to help people now if they come to me for lessons or whatever. Very happy to go and watch, or if they ring me up and want to pick my brains. I think it's important to be able to pass things on like that. I mean, as a player, there was 22 years of experiences. I often say, I think I learned more from the bad ones than the good ones. Often you were looking at people and trying to work out why you liked them. And sometimes I couldn't find the reason. Often now I look back and do, but with the bad ones, you think you shouldn't have said that. You've just lost the entire brass section. That was a bad thing to say, and so I think often I learn an awful lot more from the bad ones than the good ones. But there's so many things I rely on now when I conduct. So even the odd phrase, and sometimes I even quote where it came from. It doesn't hurt, doesn't harm. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an education that most conductors would pay for. To have 22 years of playing in an orchestra, seeing the people I saw conduct and working with us.
That sounds incredibly generous to mention about Zachary Oramo. Amazing that he would give so much of his time like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I took him out for dinner afterwards and paid and said, come on then, tell me everything. And he did. He told me everything. He said, don't do this. I think you do too much of that. I think you need to go and have some lessons, which I then did. I went to Jorma Panela for 2 weeks on a very intensive course. And he was right to send me to do that. What I was doing was based on what I'd seen Simon Rattle do and Zachary himself do and other people do. And it was all very uncontrolled. And it took somebody like Jorma to put it down in a box that big, and then for me to work out when I could break through the box, so he was right to do that. But yeah, I thanked him the last time I spoke to him, which was on a Zoom call not so long ago. And yeah, incredibly generous person.
Wonderful. So the next thing I wanted to ask you was, we were talking a lot about this very special relationship you've developed with the CBSO over the years as a player, as a conductor. But you're also a guest conductor. You travel a lot. You've worked with many orchestras around the world. So tell me those differences of working for the first time with an orchestra versus one that you know so well, and some of perhaps your fondest memories of working elsewhere.
Well, can I be honest? The first one that popped into my head, because for your viewers, we haven't scripted this. I have no idea what Christian was about to ask me. The first one that popped into my head was the first time I went to Buenos Aires and conducted the Buenos Aires Philharmonic. And it was at quite late notice. The principal cello in Birmingham, who I know has appeared in your series, Eduardo Vassallo, he suggested to his friend Eduardo Iduipe, who was running the Philharmonic at the time, they needed a conductor. And I went down, and it's the only time a chief executive has ever taken me out and said, right, rehearsals might be a bit different than you're used to now you're here. And they were, but actually what I didn't mind the difference. And the difference being that there's a lot more sort of noise, background noise, a bit more chit chat and whatever else. But most of the time it's because they're passionate about what they're doing and the music making. And to me, I adjusted to that very quickly. I didn't mind it as long as, if a hand just came up from the back of the second violins and asked me a question, that was fine because it was about the music. It wasn't, griping about the light or I'm too cold or, can we finish for a coffee yet? Any of those sort of things. It was all meant in the real, and every time I've been to Buenos Aires, and that must now be 10 or 11 or 12 times, not just with the Philharmonic, I've worked with the Instituto at the Teatro Colón. I love that sort of energy that's in the room. Sometimes it takes, it's a little bit like herding cats, but to get them all back in the room with you. But I love the energy of it. And when you go and work, I recently worked in, I think it was about 18 months ago, for the first time with an orchestra in Cologne, a WDR Funkhaus orchestra. Never worked with them before. And just within moments, I thought, God, these guys are really good and they're really following. And there seemed to be a real chemistry very quickly. And that's happened to me an awful lot. And I'm very, very pleased when it happens. WDR, actually today they asked me to go back again. They've got 3 more dates in the diary to go back in June 2022. To have that relationship with people, the players will ask you questions. They know it's all done so convivially, I think I've only had one bad experience in the last 10 or 11 years, and often that cannot necessarily be your fault. It can be somebody who's having a bad day and just decides to take it out on you. And that's sad, but it happens at times. But I mean, I enjoy guest conducting very much. I think it's one of the things I'm sort of, we're all doing at the moment. We're all sitting indoors. When can we get out and do what we do? It's not just going and conducting the CBSO, which I've been lucky to do in the last 6 or 9 months, but it's going out and meeting new orchestras and doing that thing that you'll know, Christian, is that you walk out there, you're introduced by somebody, and there's a moment when you do an upbeat in silence, you put the downbeat down, and you have no idea when they're going to react or how or what the sound is going to be, even though you know what's written on the page. It's all done in blind faith, and then in a matter of milliseconds, you've got to work out, right, okay, I now need to conduct this far ahead of the beat or that far, and with this sort of gesture, and try and work out very quickly. And I miss that greatly at home. I bet you do as well.
Oh, the last time, yeah, it's been. We've done a few rehearsals here with one of my orchestras in Sacramento, the Camellia Symphony, but of course, all the trips, everything has been cancelled.
Yeah.
So the last actual public performance was beginning of March.
Yeah.
It's been a while, and of course, yeah, the pandemic has affected the performing arts in a great way. We'll
Yeah.
see how and when
Yes,
we'll get out of this.
absolutely.
Vaccines starting to roll out, and hopefully people will do the right thing and get them, and governments will be organized and helpful. We shall see what happens.
We all hope so. Yeah.
So I'm gonna go back to the pandemic in a second because I have an important question regarding your podcast. But
Yes.
then I wanted to continue this musical trajectory and ask you about particular composers that you might have enjoyed working with, and or composers that maybe have remained obscure but you think they deserve some more recognition. Anybody you'd like to talk about?
I think, well, I think away from the UK, because we've got a lot of composers in the UK from the 20th century that have fallen by the wayside. I can think of people like Granville Bantock, York Bowen, or Edwin York Bowen is his full name. People like that who were around in the sort of 20s, 30s, 40s, whose music, I've conducted a piece of Granville Bantock that we think I did the first public performance in 105 years. It's wonderful music and it deserves hearing. But I mean, away from the UK, I try and program Korngold as much as I can, because I think he's had a bad rap over the years. I think his name, a lot of people are doing, not a lot, but quite a few conductors are trying to program more Korngold. I think he got tarred with the film composer brush and that awful review, which the violin teachers, which said it was more corn than gold, which I think he really. So I mean, for instance, I badgered the CBSO to let me conduct Gold Symphony for 5 years until eventually Stephen Maddock, bless him, said, "So what are we going to put with the Korngold Symphony?" And I could have run around the room. I was so excited. But I think back championing composers from the UK. People like Bantock, York Bowen, and just there are loads of composers from sort of 70 to 100 years ago whose music just has been quietly forgotten. And it's not because it's bad. I just think it's because people got hooked on doing Elgar and Holst, and then Britten came along and Walton came along, and there were these major figureheads, and even somebody like Arnold Bax, who was very famous in his day, but now. I played for 22 years. I think I played possibly one piece by Bax, which is Tintagel, which is an amazing piece. I don't remember playing any of the others. So already I've conducted more Bax than I ever played. And I just think, especially after this, a lot of us have spent a lot of time listening to music at home. How many people have been exploring, or have they just gone to their safe pieces? Hopefully audiences after this would accept, maybe we should be branching out. And funnily enough, talking about podcasts, I'm already thinking about a way of getting people to doing a new podcast and finding a way of getting people to go to concert halls after this, because I think a lot of the world has relied on music as a solace, as a balm, as a way of soothing the soul. And a lot of those composers, in my view, should have an airing. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit. I mean, as for working with modern composers, I've done that quite a lot, and I've always gotten on with them very well, very, very well indeed. And they're always so surprised when you say, "Look, I'm going to do your piece again somewhere else." "Oh, are you? Oh, that's so nice." I said, "Well,
And
you know,
so
I think it's a
rare.
great piece. I told you, yeah, I told you it was. I'm happy to do it again." And I'm not frightened to program that with youth orchestras or with amateur orchestras either. If it's a good piece, I think it should be played. So I'll happily do it, and the composers are very happy about it.
Wonderful. So the moment has arrived to ask you about your podcast, which I imagine was possibly a child of the pandemic initially, because you found yourself with a lot more time than usual and unable to wave your hands. And so it was a great idea, and I've enjoyed listening to some of the podcasts, and you've had incredible guests from Daniel Harding or Mark Elder to all sorts of great conducting giants. So tell us, a little bit of how you came up with this idea, and if you want to share some of the surprises you've received talking to these musicians, because I imagine they've been edited and some of them are quite long. Daniel Harding ones is in two parts, so you must have had a lot of really good stuff there. And what were
Yeah.
some of your favorite moments and surprising moments?
Well, I mean, going back to how it started, it's exactly as you said, Christian. I think my last concert was on either March the 10th or the 14th or something like that, and everything got shut down and locked down. I'd been thinking about doing a podcast anyway, which is what I've just alluded to about trying to attract people to come to concerts. And I sat there and thought, I wonder what all of the other conductors are doing. Oh, they're going to be sitting there doing nothing like me. Ding. Well, therefore, I can interview them. Right. How can I interview them? What should the interviews be about? And I started off with the idea, I don't know whether you've seen the program, it's called Inside the Actor's Studio. It's a TV program, excuse me. And basically, I think his name's James Lipton, is the host. He starts from the very beginning of an actor's career, takes them all the way through to the current present day. And then at the end, they all have to answer 10 questions. Set quite a long time ago. It's a specific set of 10 questions. And I thought, well, what a brilliant format. I'll come up with my own 10 questions. And then I just contacted all the conductors that were in my contacts list on my phone, and they all said yes. And then, I bought a cheap microphone off Amazon and worked out how to build an episode on GarageBand and did some artwork and just got it all set up and sent it out there. I think the surprise to me, I always knew it would be a little bit, the journey from earliest musical experiences to the present day would be interesting. I never realized how diverse it would be. Every single conductor's journey is so different. I knew the 10 questions would be entertaining, but I didn't know that they would be the hook that keeps people coming back. I think, if somebody says the hardest work they've ever conducted is the Rite of Spring, I can guarantee you that the next week the same answer will not appear. It might be Beethoven 5. It might be a piece of Messiaen. The answers alone. I've now done 62 episodes, of which 41 have been published. I've got still editing the rest, and we're still inviting people as well. Some of those answers are, they're always different. And I think that's the hook that keeps people coming back, is that, I wonder how they're going to answer the 10 questions. There have been a couple of very funny moments. I do edit, but actually you'd be surprised at how much I take out. Very little, and most of it is me going and in the questions. Some people are very good at talking without and ahhing, like that. That's mainly what I take out. I really don't remember taking an awful lot of things out. I even left in the moment when two of the books fell off the shelf behind me and landed on the drum kit. And I was chatting to a guy, Matt Dunkley, who's a fascinating conductor who worked most of the time in film sessions. And I said, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what that was. And he said, yeah, it sounded like the original Budumps. And so I left that in. All sorts of weird and wonderful experiences. I mean, things like with Mark Elder, I interviewed him. I I ended up interviewing him twice, because the first time there was a really dodgy internet signal, but then the second time we were in the middle of talking and there's some guy was outside in the road banging with a sledgehammer. So you got the lovely thing of Mark Elder leaning out of his window, shouting down and asking this man how long he was going to be there in the middle of this interview. Not the sort of thing you can keep in, but I mean, everybody's been so nice. I mean, Barbara Hannigan, when I spoke to Barbara, who's been such a supporter of the podcast, we did a wonderful 90 minutes or so interview, and I thought, well, I'll edit that down with, little asides taken out. It'll be about 85 minutes. I got 20 minutes into the interview, and we'd had an internet glitch, and I had no soundtrack for Barbara for the rest of so I've got only 60 odd minutes of nothing from Barbara. Wow. So I emailed her back and said, I told her what had happened, and she said, no worries, we'll do it again. And of course we had to do the whole first 20 minutes again. And 10 minutes into that, it crashed again. And so exactly. And you're thinking, this is Barbara Hannigan. I can't keep ringing her up or emailing her and saying, look, can we do it again? Did it for the third time. She recorded herself in her place in France. I recorded myself here. It's a wonderful, wonderful episode, especially because you can hear the birds twittering outside a place she lives in France. And it's a wonderful episode, but only thanks to her, kind of patience. And everybody's been really, really good at reading the email with the 10 questions on, and you can tell some people really think hard about it, and it's kept me sane, frankly, and I'm going to carry on with it. I've now run a separate Patreon page where there's a second series come out of interviews with people about conductors, but they're not conductors. There's a third series come out on Patreon as well, where I go back to the original conductors and ask them a different set of 10 questions, much more devious and nasty. I'm basically picking up a new subscriber, about one or two a month on there, and it's just it's sort of taken off, and I'm loving it. And especially now, I don't know what it's like in the States, but we've been locked down for another 6 weeks. So I've got 6 weeks ahead of me, and today I started filling up the diary with new conductors' names and spoke to my agent and said, right, who can we get? Let's keep going. So thank you for saying that you've enjoyed it. And I
look forward to listening some more.
Yeah, well, I think maybe you would agree with me also is that the most important thing that's happened is that every conductor who's been on has been open and honest, really open and honest. Okay. I've had at least 2 conductors say, look, I did my time there as music director. It didn't work. How many times do you hear a conductor say that normally? I can't think of really anybody who's spouted PR stuff that they've been fed by their agent or by their PR agency. Nobody said that. It's been wonderful just to hear people like you said, Daniel Harding say, I decided I needed to take some lessons again when I was in my mid-30s. Who would have known that? And who would have thought that he'd have had, to be open and tell you all of this? And I've had so many young conductors message me or on Twitter, on Facebook, and just say, thank you. I've learned so much about conducting from these people. Long may it continue. I've got, as I said, I think it's episode 64, and I'll just keep going, see if I can get to 100. See if I can get a really big name for number 100.
Wonderful. And it's, of course, a great inspiration, especially, like you said, for young musicians, for young conductors, aspiring conductors, just to hear this human side and not the posture of PR kind of statement, but, people really opening up and telling you the truth about what's going on and how their conducting lives have evolved. So this connects perfectly well with the final question that I have for you, which is exactly about a possible message for young musicians, for maybe even aspiring conductors. Any advice you would give to them?
I would say at the moment it all seems very dark. Your people's futures, it's not just young conductors, it's you, it's me, it's people in their 70s, 80s and 90s. It seems very dark. I think things will come back. I think music making will come back, because music making is part of what humanity does. That's what we all do, and people want to hear music. They want to hear concerts. It might not come back as it was. Might not come back in the mad whirlwind of people flying all around the world doing what they were doing. But there will always be a place for young conductors and young musicians, always be a place. And when you know, whilst the landscape might be different when we come back, when this pandemic starts to fade away, it'll still require music in that landscape. And so, yeah, I think you've got to be patient, you've got to be brave, but be aware that eventually, if you're good enough and you're passionate enough, people will want to hear your voice, whether you're a conductor or a pianist or a violinist or a bass player or whatever you are. I think it's very easy to suddenly get very oppressed by where we currently are, but it won't last forever. But humanity needs music, and as much as it needs food and water, it needs music, and therefore there's a place for it when all of it's a place for it now. So the problem is that we just can't do it live, but there's a place for it, and therefore be patient, stick in, and if you've got enough heart, and you've got something to say, people want to listen to it. I think that would be my advice.
Thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful note to finish on. And I want to thank you for your time. And hopefully one day we'll meet in Buenos Aires and have some steak and Malbec together when we're both at the Teatro Colón working with one of the orchestras there. It's been a real.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Thank you so much, Mike.
Wouldn't that be? No, pleasure. Real pleasure. Thank you, Christian.